Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Starfest 2020, the St. Albert Readers Festival. Yet again, I'm Peter Midgley, the Festival Director and your host for the evening. On behalf of Starfest, thank you yet again for joining us. Before we introduce our guests, I do want to acknowledge that we are broadcasting from Treaty 6 territory, traditional lands of First Nations and Métis people. I also would like to remind everyone that you can purchase the books online at both Edmonton's independent bookstores, Audrey's Books and Glass Bookshop. We have provided links on the YouTube feed, so please follow the links, buy the books. Our authors will thank you. After the introductions, our guests will speak for about 40 minutes. During that time, please post your comments in the comment features. I will gather them and I will relay them to our guests at the end of the evening in our short Q&A session. Do remember, if you are going to comment on YouTube, you have to log in. Tonight's guests, Jacqueline Baker and Marina Endicott, are old-time Starfest favorites. They were scheduled to speak to us the night, in fact, that COVID hit and everything shut down. So it is lovely to have them back at last, finally here. Our interviewer, Jacqueline Baker, is the author of The Broken Hours and other novels and books. She teaches creative writing at MacEwan University in Edmonton. Jackie, welcome back to the studio.
Thank you, Peter.
Our star for the evening, Marina Endicott, grew up in Nova Scotia and Toronto, and has lived in England, Saskatoon, and Alberta, and is now back in Saskatoon. She split her time between that and Edmonton, or so was the intention before COVID. She teaches online at the moment for MacEwan University, and her book, The Difference, won the 2020 Howard O'Hagan Award for Fiction. Marina, welcome back among friends.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here, Peter.
All right, so before I hand over, just remember, please, people, post your comments in the comments feature and we will get them to them in the Q&A session. Enjoy your evening.
Thank you, Peter. Hello, Marina.
Hello, Jackie. It's so nice to see you.
So nice to see you. You feel very far away, but this is lovely. Did you know that that our event was scheduled for the night that COVID descended?
I did, because we just moved. So my plan was to drive back and to be in Starfest with you. And I was really looking forward to that. And then I couldn't drive back because everything was down.
So you moved to a new city. You're in Saskatoon. You put a novel into the world all during COVID.
Yeah.
How was it?
I think a lot of writers are secretly almost glad about COVID in a weird way, because it relieves us of any responsibility to be out in the world or at all extroverted. And so it's, in some ways, we're living our ideal life where we're forced to stay inside and spend most of our time at our desks and on the computer. So in a way, I don't really mind it. And also, I love the eeriness of the city, the quiet city and the roads being silent. And I've flown a few times. I've had to fly to Toronto to look after my parents, and I've never had such wonderful flights. And the emptiness of the airport is really weirdly lovely. But on the other hand, I miss you and I miss my friends everywhere, and I miss company. We miss company.
We do miss company, but I was thinking the same thing, that, there were many times, especially early on when I was first publishing, that public appearances made me so anxious that I thought, oh, only I could be at home writing my books and never have to take the stage in my pajamas. And here we are doing that very thing.
I've put my pants mostly away. I'm wearing, I have a couple of pairs of basically sweatpants, and I think I'm in tune with the rest of the world right now. I don't think anybody is wearing our proper pants anymore.
Right. Yes. Well, I think that that's certainly one of the benefits of COVID. But how has it been actually putting a new book out into this world?
Well, I was lucky enough that the Canadian edition of the book came out last fall. So I actually had a book tour and did see people and walk around the earth, which was wonderful. But it came out in the States in June, and I was really looking forward to that. And quite excited about the various things that were planned for me in New York and Philadelphia. And so all that, of course, was canceled. Not only you can't go anywhere, but also you can't get into the States unless you have some reason for it. So I have done some online things, but it's very strange to have a book go out into a gigantic field of crickets. And then, you know, on the other hand, I can't be blamed for anything, really. It's impossible to do anything. So we'll just have to let it swim on the sea for a while.
Yes, that's a lovely way to put it. This book has been a long time in the making, and I know we've talked about this before, but could you just talk a little bit about the genesis of it? I think it's a lovely story where it all came from.
Oh, well, came from many different places, but as Peter said, I grew up in Nova Scotia. I was actually born in BC, and we moved to Nova Scotia when I was 7. And my name, Marina, means the sea, and I was tremendously excited to move to the ocean. And I had a wonderful time in Yarmouth in many ways, although not in others. But I had a wonderful piano teacher who was a pillar of the town, a dragon lady, a ferocious old woman, lived alone with her dog and her 2 pianos, and her house absolutely full of artifacts from the sea, because her father had been a sea captain, and she had, as she told us often, been brought up on a clipper ship. And the way to get out of trouble if you hadn't practiced was to encourage Miss Ladd to tell stories of her time at sea. So I spent quite a lot of time engaging her in sea stories. And I loved those stories. And, even just to look at the narwhal's tusk over her piano. And she was an enormously powerful influence for me. She was an intelligent, strong woman, creating a life for herself alone. And I really respected her for that. But she was also kind of a monster. And so when Google came in the 90s, you'd Google yourself and there'd be two hits, and then you'd Google everybody else you knew. And so I Googled Miss Ladd in the 90s, living in Cochrane, Alberta. And what came up was just the speaker, the icon of the speaker with the little lines, and her voice coming out of the computer, her cracked, old Nova Scotia voice that I knew then, I knew better than my own voice, telling the story of her mother's honeymoon voyage to the South Seas. And although I'd heard millions of stories from her, I'd never heard this one. And she told the story of how her mother went on the Morning Light, her father's ship, around to Tonga and into Micronesia, and they stopped at an island for some of the people who lived there to come and trade with them. And the people who came to the ship had a 5-year-old boy with them. And she said, my mother took a shine to him. She thought he was so sweet, and so she bought him for 4 pounds of tobacco. And the shock of hearing that was profound. It was a horrible shock to hear her talking about the purchase of that boy as if it was a parrot that they found on their travels. She went on to tell what happened to the boy in a little bit of detail, not really very much. He was quite clever. Her mother taught him English, a little bit of Latin. He learned a little Chinese from the cook. So there were a few details. One of the details was that he didn't know how to use the stairs. He wanted to go down them on his hands and knees, and he had to be taught, she said. He knew nothing. And that obliviousness to the reality of that child just really struck me at that moment in a painful, painful way, because it was so little removed from me. That was my piano teacher's mother who did that. And the idea that I was linked so closely to her was really, really stopped me in my tracks. And I didn't think I could possibly have dared to write about it, though, because it was too, not even maybe my story to tell. But then I was lucky enough to go to Tonga and New Zealand when I won the Commonwealth Writers' Prize. And I spent 10 days in Tonga talking and giving workshops and teaching little kids, all of whom were just as bright and as animated and as smart as that little boy must have been. And it began to seem to me like a form of cowardice not to write it, that I was avoiding writing it because it was going to be too difficult. And I was using the excuse of it not being my story, when in fact, it is my story, that white people went all over the world and thought they knew better. And so I decided that it was time to investigate that story and figure out how your person could come to think that they knew better and how they might be able to change their mind.
Yeah, I think it's stunning. I mean, I'm glad that you talked about that. The fact that we often think about it's going on over there when in fact it's right here. It's so close to us, and it's just a few clicks away on Google, and you're like, oh my God, there it is. And I've never heard a better provenance for a book ever. I think it's just an absolutely heartbreaking and somehow also wonderful story. You know, that there all of these connections across time and place is really wonderful. I wonder, I mean, you've done a lot of research for this book and for all of your books, actually. Do you ever feel like I never want to do another heavily researched book ever again?
Are you saying this while in the middle of a heavily researched book yourself?
Asking for a friend.
Yeah. Oh man, I agree with you. Never again. And you know, I worked so hard on the research for my vaudeville book, and I never want to hear the word vaudeville again. Because you do all the research to create the world that you need to walk around in, to immerse yourself in that culture, to know crazy things like how the 72 names of sales, and you need all that information while you're writing the book. But then you've written the book and it's finished, and you don't need that information anymore. But people keep on giving me vaudeville books, still, and also now things about the sea. I do wonder if I'll ever do another historical book, but in fact, there's one percolating in the back of my mind right now. So I suspect that I will continue to go back and forth from the present day to the historical stuff. It's not it's not that I'm so fascinated with historical fiction. It's just that you see that this time is like our time. That really, the shame that I felt on listening to the story of this woman taking this child away was so familiar, painfully familiar, because we have that shame all the time of the way that children on residential schools were treated. And that is present day. That's not, some historical distant thing. And I think that's how you get sucked into doing another historical novel yet again.
Right. And human nature doesn't change all that much through the ages, in fact.
I would that it did.
But the details of life sure do. And it's that. And so do you find when you're writing, how do you manage it? So I know that you do a lot of research in advance, but when you're writing and you inevitably get to the moment where you think, what did they call that back then? Did they have that back then? And because we're composing on laptops for I think you write on a computer.
Oh, yeah,
the rabbit hole, the endless rabbit hole, dark tunnel of research that is the justifiable procrastination of actually finishing your novel is just a click away.
But you know what? It's always been like that. You could always run over to the library and figure out how long it took them to get from Timbuktu to London in 1862 and exactly what kind of vehicles they took. It's like there's two kinds of research. There's the first kind of world creation, understanding of the culture, that kind of immersing yourself in knowledge of the period. And then you leap into writing, and then you figure out what you need to know. And Fred Stenson, the wonderful Alberta writer, gave me this piece of advice a long time ago, to not let the writing get too far ahead of the research, be writing and researching at the same time. And I think it's very acute. It's really what we need to do, but it's almost impossible too, because you don't even know what you need to know until you're in the middle of figuring out how to get to Timbuktu. I think I went off topic, because I think what you were saying is, how do you stop yourself from going down the rabbit hole? And I don't know. deadlines is the only way that I stop myself, because it's so much more fun in a certain way to figure out exactly how they tied their bustles and exactly what kind of stitching they used than it is to get on and solve the problem of, your second
Right.
chapter.
So my question also is then, when you're composing and you're zipping along with your story and you come to that moment where you think, oh, how did they tie their bustles then? What do you do in that moment? Do you stop what you're writing, do a quick Google search, come back with the information that you need? Or how do you manage it? Do you press on with the writing and leave the details for later?
I think it's different. I think it depends on whether I need to know whether they could get to Truro, Nova Scotia, or I can just say they went.
Right.
One of the things, here was a real research thing that happened to me when I was writer in residence at MacEwan. I don't actually teach at MacEwan. I teach at University of Alberta, but I was writer in residence at MacEwan when I broke the back of this book and actually started to write it, which I'm so grateful to MacEwan for. And I was right down the hall from you at that point. And you probably remember the shrieks that came out of my office when I was researching wind patterns and prevailing winds and currents. And I realized suddenly, as I was sitting there, that the entire book was screwed. That all this time I'd been thinking that what they did was they went from Nova Scotia around Cape Horn and up into the South Pacific, because that's what it looks like on the map. And the whole book was planned for that. And then I suddenly realized that no, they didn't do that. They couldn't do it. No trade ship would ever do that because they'd die, because it's so dangerous to go around the Horn from east to west. So what they always do is they go around the globe the other way with the prevailing trade winds, and they go under South Africa, under Australia, and then up into the South Pacific. And I thought, how could I have been so stupid and missed this massive thing? And my book is ruined. And, for 2 weeks, I just sat in my office and cried because I had screwed my book.
I remember that. I'd sometimes knock and bring you a coffee and
I'd just be sitting
let you cry some more. Yeah,
blah, blah,
weeping.
blah.
Yeah.
And, it actually reduced itself down to like one sentence. There's one sentence where one of the passengers says, "Oh, I thought we would go around the Horn," and the captain laughs and says, "Oh no, we don't do that. That won't work." And it was fine. It was fine.
Fine.
So I think most research questions can be answered with they went there, they got there.
Yeah.
So you should keep writing the book if it's you that is the friend you're asking for.
It's not me. No, I swear it isn't me at all. I'm fine. I'm totally fine. I think it's a tricky thing, though. I mean, I don't know how often you've written pieces set in the contemporary moment. It's a completely different experience. It's nothing like writing a historical novel.
No. But then, here's the other thing, though. You should stop once in a while, because then you get those incredible gifts of research that you would never have thought of or known, that you couldn't have known, except that you were so deeply immersed.
Right.
In the research.
And not only that, but the little gems that you come across, completely unlooked for,
Yeah,
sometimes change the course of the story that you're telling. And it can be a very small thing that you did not know before. And the knowing of it, you can't unknow for the story. And it changes the course of the events.
But usually that's good.
It's usually good. Can I get you to read a little bit now? And then we'll talk a bit more?
Of course. I thought I would read to you from fairly early on in the book, but not the beginning. This is when they've gone to Eleuthera. So Kay is 11, almost 12, and her sister Thea is almost 20 years older, her half-sister. They've stopped at in the Bahamas at the island of Eleuthera. And while there, Thea has suffered a miscarriage. Thea lay all day in Mrs. Judd's guest chamber, still bleeding. The world was made of blood. Still more was coming. They said it would go on for another day or so, like the worst of one's womanly time. Solid clots like portions of fresh liver ready for the pan, sliding smoothly out as if it was an ordinary month, no pain to speak of anymore. Mrs. Judd said one must not repine. God's will, she said. She said she and the canon had been disappointed time out of mind, 4 times that she knew of. She left Thea alone so she could think again, but Thea did not want to think. Francis came and sat on the end of the remade bed, clean-looking now, so he could be spared her pain. He stroked his hand along her leg. "Never mind," he said. "Never mind, my dear." And she nodded to relieve him. But of course they minded. Nothing was said to Kay that morning or ever. Rhoda said Thea was still too sick to talk and for they girls not to be at her, and continued going to and fro with bowls and basins, a great bustle of washing in the hut past the kitchen, and a bower of sheets and cloths hung swaying and bleaching in the sun. Kay stayed with Susanna and Sally, the little girls, in the back kitchen, and Francis did not come. Kay thought, not knowing what to think, that Thea might have had an apoplexy like their father, but survived it. They would say if she was dead, wouldn't they? Not tuberculosis. Kay had seen many people die of that, and it took a long time before they wasted into death. She had not died from the baby, since there was no baby crying or demanding. Kay would have looked after it if Thea died, as Thea had looked after her when her mother died. Lying in the little white bed that evening, Kay reasoned it out from the sadness in the house and the noise and now the silence. The baby itself must have died, as a calf will sometimes die and be pulled dead out of its mother. On the third day, able to carry herself without showing weakness, Thea went into the empty church in the afternoon and knelt to pray, but found the usual words sticking in her throat. After a time, the curate, Mr. Brimner, appeared at the pew's end. He bowed minutely in his over-formal way. "I fear Canon Judd has ridden out over the island, but if it would help you to have spiritual counsel or simply company, I am at your disposal." Thea moved her stiff mouth to courtesy and said she was very well, thank you. He nodded. "This morning I found myself refreshed by the words of a collect in the early baptismal service, the 1549, which I thought might be of use to you. Of course, all stillborn children are welcomed into the sight of God. There can be no question otherwise, but still the language here." He waited as if for permission, and at her silence dipped his head and took a card from his vest pocket. "Receive them, O Lord, as thou hast promised by thy well-beloved Son, saying, 'Ask and you shall have, seek and you shall find.'" Mr. Brimner looked up again as if to be certain she was attending and allowing him to continue. Receiving no stop from her, he did so, saying, "Ask and you shall have, seek and you shall find, knock and it shall be opened unto you. Give now unto us that ask, let us that seek find. Open thy gate unto us that knock, that this infant may enjoy the everlasting benediction of thy heavenly washing, and may come to the eternal kingdom which thou hast promised by Christ our Lord. Amen." At heavenly washing, Thea felt her eyes open and tears flood briefly out. She had a fresh hanky, but could not find it in the unfamiliar pockets of the skirt Mrs. Judd had lent her. Mr. Brimner waved a large white one at her nose, and she caught it and turned away for a moment. Only a few tears, quietly shed, like a deposit on her grief. It was not true release. It was not that she had forgiven God. Walking down the gravel path beside the church, Kay heard someone weeping. She stood on tiptoe to look in the window, but it was too high. Instead, she slipped into the vestry porch, silent and bare feet, shadowy against the white walls, in her white dress, no longer spotless, but softened by sun and salt water. Thea was praying and crying, a hanky pressed to her face. It must be hard to have a baby inside you and find that the baby had died. And perhaps Francis would be angry. Mr. Brimner looked up and saw Kay standing there, and he smiled again at her as he had the first day, face creasing into an excess of kindness. He waved a hand to her as to a friend, an equal. She nodded back and went out on cat feet. There she was still, wandering in the graveyard when he came out. She saw him casting about for a glimpse of her. He started over the grass, stepping over graves, just as if a person was not rotted away to white sticks under each one. "Miss Kay," he said, when near enough. "Mr. Brimner," she said in turn, since he kept waiting for her to speak. "I have been, well, do you know, Captain Grant was so kind as to suggest that I might take passage to Tonga on the Morning Light. And I wish to say, I have been accustomed to earn my keep. Your brother says your schooling has been neglected. He thought we might study together as we go to lessen the burden for your sister, and perhaps increase your skill in algebra." At her grimace, he said, or we could study the English poets, Spencer, Donne, Milton. I am myself now engaged on a work of, but no, I see you are unmoved by poesy. The Latin tongue, then. I could benefit from polishing my Catullus." Kay looked at him. Her father's Hebrew Bible, thick and backwards, the blackest ink on the thinnest paper, lay in the bottom of her trunk. "Could you teach me Hebrew?" He smiled again, blessedly without all the creases. "Sadly, I am no hand at Hebrew, but what would you think of ancient Greek?" Her heart leapt. Cyrus and Xerxes, the 300, I believe I saw a first Greek book on Canon Judd's shelves. We might persuade him to part with it. Kay said, "Would I learn the other letters? The Greek alphabet? Well, necessarily. My father did not have time to teach me yet, and then he died." "Well, then, I believe it is a bargain." Mr. Brimner put out his hand, and Kay took it. His smile, as usual, broke his head in two, this time the neck jutting out to add emphasis to his pleasure. Kay took her hand back, but she was pleased. I'm going to skip ahead to them on the boat a little bit later as they get back off on their way to Tonga this time. Mr. Brimner came aboard like a sailor, jumping handily over the lip at the top of an end of the gangplank, all courteous enthusiasm for such a ship-shaped vessel. He nodded to Kay, but did not linger on deck, perhaps having been long enough at Eleuthera. He only clapped his hands together and went below to oversee the stowage of his trunks. She watched him go down the stairs, thin legs trotting cleverly below his portly body. The beauty of the filling sails filled her eyes. They were putting on sail now, white acres lifting and lifting into the giddy air. Not unhappy, Kay gripped the rail as the morning light swayed on a strong wave of moving sea and caught the wind to sweep around into the darker Atlantic blue, the true deep ocean. At the wheelhouse, Francis stood absorbed in charts, with Mr. Wright roaring an occasional command to hearten the crew after their 3-day rest. Every shout rang in Kay's ears because it must hurt Thea's. Kay did not want to look at her in case it hurt her to be observed in this condition. Her face looked foreign. She could not truly be thinner in only 3 days, but the pale skin was drawn tight over her forehead and her eyes were blue shadowed. It would be worse if Thea had died and Kay had to sail on alone with Francis forever, whom she hardly knew. Mr. Brimner trotted back up from below where Hubbard had been settling him in his cabin. He smacked his linen-jacketed chest with both hands and searched a moment in his pockets, and then pulled out a pair of dark glass spectacles and exhibited them to Kay. "Guard the eyes from strain." He pulled each rounded crook carefully over his great ear tops. "My physician's strict orders," he told her solemnly. A crackpot. She was stuck with him now. Thea tilted the brim of her straw hat to see him better. "Did you have them specially made?" she asked. "In Oxford," he answered. "Ground and smoked to my eye's idiosyncrasy. They answer very well, but some things shine strangely through them." He looked about him as if to prove it. "Rainbows and glories, the sun itself, some colors, reds, greens, glow with a ferocious beauty that tempts the eye." Gazing out from his portable darkness, he looked like that villainous kidnapper, blind Mr. Mole of Thumbelina in Kay's childhood book of stories. It was strange to have another person now in the world of the ship. I think I'll stop there.
No, please don't. You know, I remember the first time I heard you read this from this book, do you remember it was at McEwen many years ago?
Yeah.
And you read the opening.
I did.
And it was just as beautiful. I mean, that was an early draft. And yet I'm sitting listening to you read it. I was listening to you read it then, and it felt like this polished, fully formed, lyrical, beautiful thing. It's like, does it just appear on the page that way for you? You don't even have to work at it?
I actually just voices speak to me and it comes right through. No, of course it. But Gertrude Story was the first writer in residence I ever went to visit at the library in Saskatoon 100 years ago. And she actually told me, I write what the voices tell me to write. I made a bargain with them. I said I would write for 10 years for them, and I'm just writing down what they say. And then I'm going to stop. And then she did stop. But no, I don't have voices telling me stuff. Do you have voices telling you what to write?
I have voices telling me to do a lot of things. It's rarely to do with my writing.
Quit writing is what my voice
is. Like, what are you doing?
You're insane.
Let's talk about that. We were talking about that earlier, about the way we set out to write this thing. And we have a pretty good idea what this thing will be. Maybe we can't see it all the way to the end, but we think we have a good idea of what it's going to be. And somewhere in the putting down of it, it becomes a thing we had not expected. Do you find that's true for you? Was it true for The Difference?
It really was, yeah. I always think, as you said, that I know where it's going. I often start a book with a sort of a little slideshow in my mind of the end. So for example, in my book, Good to a Fault, I absolutely knew that it was going to end in a picnic on the river. But I didn't know who would be there. I just could see figures moving around in the smoke by the river. I could see the pear and the orange that they were eating. And so I start with some vision of the end, yeah. But no, I don't know. It almost seems like it's necessary for some transformation to take place in order for the book to become itself. I don't know if you find that too, but I start out with my piddly little brain with one idea, and it's a smallish idea because I'm not really very smart. And then the book itself comes to life, and the book dictates a much better book than I could have imagined or that I could have dreamed up that I would write. The book itself fulfills itself in a way. So in this book, for example, I fully intended it to be just Thea, and she would adopt the boy, and it would be just the two of them. But I needed another eye. I needed a child to be able to look at that situation clearly, because Thea has completely, fully agrees with the idea of benevolence and that it's possible to do people good by trying to make them more like you. And I needed somebody else who had a different point of view, literally, a different vision or a different view on what's happening and could look at what is the transaction of the child being taken away from his home and see it differently and maybe see it more clearly. And so I needed Kay. And then, honestly, I don't know where Mr. Brimner came from. I needed her to keep on going to school, and Thea was too tired. And then he was just there at the church in the Bahamas, and then I liked him, and so he came along.
Good Mr. Brimner. As I've said, he's my favorite character in the novel. I think he's so wonderful. But he just wandered into your story, really kind of fully formed, didn't he?
Well, absolutely, and I felt as if I knew him right away, which I think that I know that happens to you because I've seen it in your books. I've certainly seen it in the Broken Hours, where, I mean, every character in there is, I believe that they existed before you started writing about them.
What is that? I mean, do you speculate about this? What is this? What is this thing that happens when we start out with this puny little, in my case, certainly this puny little story that I have in mind? It's a very small story. I think it's marvelous in my head, but it's a very small story ultimately. And from some other grace comes this much bigger, much richer thing. Have you speculated about what that is? Do you ever think about it?
I actually have speculated about it. I've been forced to because I teach a lot, as of course you teach even more. And it happens in the class. you give them a little stupid little piddly exercise, and by the end of the hour, a whole bunch of people exist. A whole bunch of lives have been created by the strange alchemy of just imagining and writing something down about that imagining. And I'm still thinking about student characters that happened 20 years ago that I still can't. There was a wonderful, well, I won't go on because I could go on for hours talking about student characters that still live in my mind, and stories that I wrote when I was a kid that they're alive somehow still.
I know that you do these, that you do in-class exercises with your students as well. So you give them a prompt, and then you let them write for a timed writing, maybe 5-10 minutes.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll get them to read what they've just written. And honest to God, there are times where I think, how did you do that? These are, 18, 19, 20-year-olds just arrived here trying to write, and they're writing these astonishing short pieces in 5 minutes.
Yeah, it's so lovely. It's what keeps us teaching, I think. It's what keeps us, allows you to keep on doing that action, which, although thank God buys the groceries, it does take away from the time that your books want. But it also feeds the time that your books want, because you see every day enacted that creation that links to something that is bigger and more beautiful and better than you could write yourself. And that certainly better than these 18-year-olds can write, and yet they write it.
They write it, yep. I was talking to my students today about that, the other idea about that you can't ever get anything 100% right.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly look back at things I've published recently or long ago, and there are many things that I would change. So 2 questions about that. One, how do you know when to stop? How do you know when you've done enough and it's really time now to turn your attention elsewhere, to move on to something else? And then second, can you think of things that you would go back and change about previous books, even the difference, even though that's still very close?
I think it can always be better. They talk about painting and knowing when to stop in a painting, and that if you keep painting, you overpaint it, you go too far. I don't really think that pertains to fiction. It might to poetry, I don't know. But in fiction, I think you can always make it a little bit better. You can always see something that could be more elegantly phrased or rawer, or that you've just fudged it a little, you just faked it a bit, and you can clean that up. So the more drafts I can do, the happier I am. And when I know it's finished is when my deadline is passed and I have to send it in, basically. And I find it now quite difficult to write without a deadline because I have so many other things that I should be doing. But the other part of that was, would I change anything? And I don't want to go back, and I don't want to read them anymore, because it's not that they're dead to me, but they're not changeable now. And so it's a bit difficult to be forced to go back if you have to look for something or some character somebody wants something. The best thing, though, is if you happen upon a book, like in a used bookstore, and you just open it up and you read a bit and you think, well, who the heck wrote that? I don't remember that. And that's lovely. It's
lovely.
Yeah, it's lovely when it's away from you enough that you can it has its own life, and you can let it go.
And you think, that's pretty good.
And you often think that's very good. Who did that?
It's
excellent. Because you never think that, really.
Never.
You think,
oh Lord,
I will revel in being a novelist, and I'm a novelist, and I can write novels, and geez Louise, the times you think that your work is good are like 12 minutes per book, where you think, oh, this afternoon I actually wrote something good. But here's the good thing.
Yeah.
And that is that the stuff, when I think one afternoon, oh, I'm a rare genius, and that is very fine. It came from above and it was inspired. And then the stuff that you wrote because you had to get them to chapter 2, later on, there's no difference between the two. They're both the same.
They're both the same.
Yeah, I think so.
And certainly you and I have exchanged texts in which we say, well, that's it. There's no point in going on. I've obviously lost any ability I had to write, and just tell me
Yeah.
to stop. Put me out of my misery and tell me to stop.
But that's so true, though, because we don't, you'd think you would get better and better at this. And in fact, we have probably got a little, maybe we've gotten faster at certain things, but you don't get to write the same book over. You can't, like a surgeon, do 17 appendectomies. You have to write a new freaking book that you don't know how to write.
Right. I often think, too, that if I had to go back and write one of those books again, I don't think I could do it. Right? I don't think I could do it now the way I did it then.
No, that's
Things
true.
change. Things change. And we are in a huge time of change now. So I know you finished the book before the global situation became what it was. I'm in the middle of one.
I know.
How has it changed? Oh, I don't even know how to ask it. How has the global situation made you rethink how you approach stories?
What a difficult question, because I don't yet know the answer. I'm sure that it has changed everything. I'm just really a slow thinker, secretly. It's not so much that I'm stupid. It's just that it takes me so long to think. And I only really figure out what I think about things about 20 years later. So I don't yet know how this has changed, but everybody and everything has changed. But I'm actually really dreading reading the 700,000 books that will come out of COVID.
About pandemics?
Yeah, I don't want to read
I'm working on one right now.
Well, I will read yours, but only because
Thank you. That's very good of you.
I would rather read a book of yours that was set, say, in the 19th century.
If only someone would write that book. I think so too. I think that of course, there are going to be many books that come out of this, but I don't think we've stared at it long enough. I think, was it Flannery O'Connor who said that writing requires a certain degree of stupidity that allows you to just sit and stare at a thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's not understanding necessarily, but it's a kind of, you get to see the thing for what it is, maybe. And I need to stare at a thing for a long time. I need to stare at the page a long time before I can put words on it.
I think that's my best thing, is staring.
Staring.
I'm a good starer, but what it means is that I get up really early in the morning. I'm usually writing before 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
And I say writing, but what I'm doing is staring. And I just read over it and stare at it and think, this is shit. And then I read some more and I read over it. And then about 10:30 or 11 at night, I might be able to write some stuff. That's a very inefficient way to work.
It's also how I work. Maybe we all work that way. But the thing is, and the thing that people don't always say, is that it is shit. we do write that. The stuff that we put down, it's shitty writing.
That's right.
It doesn't come out fully formed. It doesn't come out polished. We talk with our students about this all the time, that in fact, the good writing doesn't happen with the first draft or even the second draft necessarily. It's way down the road when we have time, to see what it is we're actually doing, because we don't know that at the time. And then B, to take a look at our sentences and the way we're crafting our story.
Hemingway used to talk about the main writer's tool being the bullshit detector. And I used to think that, I sort of assumed that meant the bullshit detector towards everybody else. And now I understand it's your own that he's saying you have to detect that. You have to detect every place that you're just a little bit less than honest, or you're just a little lazy, or there's a better way to do it, but it's going to be too hard, or there's some conflict between people that you just don't want to get into, so you're just going to let one of them leave instead, and the other one goes, Charlotte, as they leave. And instead, you need to go back, bring Charlotte back into this room and actually deal with
back in here.
Sit down, Charlotte.
Do you read reviews?
Oh, yes and no. I used to read reviews, but I used to read everything. And I don't, and the thing is, I'll tell you what cured me of reading reviews was Goodreads. And I don't read them because they're just going to get me depressed. There's even the good ones.
Even the good ones.
I don't remember the good ones. I remember every word of the bad ones. I don't remember the good ones except, oh, there was some sort of wishy-washy, it was great thing, you know. But no, do you read them?
Goodreads cured me of reading reviews. The very same experience. I don't read them anymore, and it's funny that you mentioned that, because I was just talking with some colleagues at McEwen today who were talking about putting a book into the world and how scary that feels, because then people can say whatever they want about it. And I'm like, I've got something I can read to you from Goodreads for my first novel, and it's just a dreadful, like it could not be worse review. And I think that's the last review I read. I thought, this isn't going to help me write books. It's not going to help me do anything better in my craft. And so even if they're good, I think, I don't know if it's useful.
You know, I really think it's Hannah Arendt said that when she's working, she doesn't think about the reaction or the reviews because she's working. And then the interviewer said, "Oh, well, what about when you're finished?" And she said, "Well, then it's finished. Why would I read about it then?" Yeah. Yeah. The one cheerful thing is if you get really sad about that, you can look up Chekhov on Goodreads. This was boring. I don't know why he had to go on for so long. Seemed slow. So you can cheer yourself up a little bit.
Right. Doing better than Chekhov.
Amazon reviews are always a good antidote. Margaret Atwood, she seems full of herself. Alice Munro, who does she think she is?
Yeah, it's no good. It's no good. Don't read your reviews. So I know that we're running out of time.
Oh no.
And but I want to have time for my rapid fire 10.
Oh no. Oh man,
yes.
You said you were going to do this.
Are you willing?
I'm willing. Okay. Do I have to be entirely okay? Never mind. I'm just go ahead. Ask.
No, what was the do you have to what? Do you have to be totally honest?
If you see me crossing my eyes, you'll know I'm not honest.
I'm looking closely. Yeah, there they are. So don't think too long about your answers. Just a quick answer. Okay. You can elaborate if you want to elaborate.
I can't wait. This is exciting.
It is, isn't it? Are you a little bit worried?
I'm terrified.
I know you've had some bad questions in stage interviews in the past. I won't be asking those. Ready?
Yeah, but now I'm terrified.
We'll start off easy. Last TV show you binged?
Oh, Stranger Things. I really enjoyed it.
That surprises me.
Me too.
You don't like scary things?
I hate scary things. But my daughter kept yelling, "It's not scary. It's not scary." I know, but I was pretty scared because I have a very my suspension belief is already on tippy toes.
Yeah, you got a low bar for scary. Book character you identify with?
Oh, Anne Elliot in Persuasion, who doesn't get married till she's very old. Was me.
I don't think you were very old.
I was so old. I was so old.
How old were you?
When I got married, I was 42. I was 42. But we'd been together for quite a while.
Okay. Class in school you were very bad at?
Sorry, class in school? I actually failed home ec.
So did I. Well, I didn't fail. She gave me a C+. Anyway, this is a story for another time.
F.
What? Tell me why. What happened?
It was the petty point. I just couldn't finish the petty point. Come on. We have lives.
What is petty point?
Needle point, but very small.
Gosh, you were doing that in home ec?
Yeah, it was crazy. It was Nova Scotia.
Okay. You didn't finish it.
I didn't finish it, and I didn't finish the wastebasket made out of discarded Christmas cards either, because we didn't keep Christmas cards in my family. And you were supposed to sew them together, and it was pointless. Just make me cook some more. I'll cook as much as you want, but don't make me do that stupid crap.
You're an excellent cook.
I'm an excellent cook.
Yeah. It was sewing that undid me in home ec. Something you always have in your bag?
Well, you think I'm going to say lipstick.
No, I don't.
This is so funny because I asked my daughter Rachel, who's a fabric designer, what we were talking about this the other day, and we were talking about felting and how you could do some mending on wool by felting on socks. And her nana said, her grandmother said, well, but where would we get a felting needle? And Rachel looked kind of shamefaced, and she said, well, I always have one in my bag. She carries felting needles in her wallet.
Oh, the little darling.
Yeah, I know. What I always have in my bag, I always have Rescue Remedy, that box flower essence stuff you take with an eyedropper that's supposed to calm you down. I don't know whether it works, but it's in my bag.
Okay. Have you taken some tonight?
No, I forgot.
Okay. Why did you think I would say lipstick, Marina?
I have an addiction and you know it, and it's not very nice to bring it up on national television.
That's so unkind of me.
I have a serious lipstick problem. I just love the stuff. And I'm
Is it
always
a problem? It's not a problem.
Well, that's one thing that COVID has actually cured me of, because you can't go try them on now. So I don't know when I last bought a lipstick. Jackie, my life has gone to shards and ashes. Where's the lipstick?
You showed me, if this isn't revealing too much, you showed me an app once where there's an actual app, right? You can try the lipstick on. So
it's on Chanel, the Chanel site.
Chanel app.
A try on, and it's very good. If you like trying on lipstick, you just go to and it puts fake lips on you. It's very funny.
It was not very long after I met you when I was putting on some lipstick and you asked me what it was, and then you peered at me and said, well, that's the same color as your lips. You're going to have to come out with me and I'll show you. I'll show you.
I don't think I said that. I think I said that's burnt bees. That doesn't count. That's lip balm.
Anyway, it's been all downhill from there, as you know.
I've led you astray.
What did you just put on?
It was actually Bobbi Brown. I like it quite a lot. It's called Lip Tint, Extra Lip Tint, and this one is Bare Peach. I think it's quite an effective online Zoom lipstick. I also have Milk sitting here, which is like, seriously, I have a problem. I'm not going to show you all the other ones I have.
Marina is not getting any advertising kickback dollars for her mentions of any products this evening. Unfortunately. It would be nice if you did.
That would be great. That's a good way for writers to make a little money.
Maybe Peter could bring Bobbi Brown in to see the podcast episode. Nicely done. Okay. We're getting the 5 minutes heads up, so I'm going to press on.
Oh, good.
Something people often get wrong about you.
Oh, well, I think that what I think about that would be different from what either is real or what anybody else would think. I think I always have to introduce myself to people. I don't think people know me right away. I think I always have to kind of translate myself to them.
Right. Yeah. I get that. Okay. Acting role you wish you had played.
Oh, well, I played many that I wished I played, but I never got to play. Let's think of a good one. I would have liked to do like Rosalind in As You Like It, or one of those kind of wonderful, brave girl boys. And nobody ever would cast me as that because of the bosom. And, I always was playing the sister or the mother, and so I became a director instead because I was getting boring parts.
Right, and then a writer. So.
And then
all been for the good.
Which is much more fun, the most fun.
Is it? Well, that would be another conversation, actually. I'd like to hear your comparison between a solo art and a collaborative art, really.
Let me add it. Really
must be enormous.
We don't have the 8 hours that it will take tonight.
We'll talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
A book you wish you had written.
Oh, well, Jesus' Son by Dennis Johnson.
Is that the one with the short story?
Car crash while hitchhiking?
Yes.
Yes, I was just talking about that with students the other day, and man, that is a terrifying story and probably the best story in the world. But also anything by George Saunders, I wish I'd written. I wish I could write any of those things. Or Chekhov, or any of Penelope Fitzgerald. Well, you know my list. A lot of books I wish I'd written.
So many lovely books. Something you are very bad at.
I'm really not a good housekeeper. I'm just not. I don't have the gift. I'm a good cook, but my sister and my mother walk through a room and just kind of twitch things, and everything looks great. Everything looks better. They have that gift of bringing grace and peacefulness to a room, and I lack it. All I can do is just clean, and even then, I'm not that great at that. So I'm sad about it, because I like living in a orderly and beautiful space, and I quite often have to just make do with clean.
Something you're grateful for right now.
I'm grateful for being able to live with the people that I like the best in the world.
That's a good thing. Last one. Fill in the blank. Bravery is...
Jackie Baker.
I refuse to accept that answer.
Bravery is whoever needs it comes up with it.
Well, I wish I had ended on your answer to the house cleaning one, because you gave me such a lovely segue, because you were talking about how hard it is for you to put order in a room and make things look graceful and lovely. And as you were talking, I'm thinking, but that's what you do with your writing, Marina. You are such a beautiful writer. The book, The Difference, and your other books, it's as if the structure grows out of your story so organically that you can't see that it's there. You can't see the bones of the thing. And yet when you step back and look at it, you see the perfect order that's there, that is overlaid with this beauty and grace and light. And it's a lovely book. We're going to talk more about that at the end, I hope. But
no, you couldn't have said anything that would make me happier than that.
Well, it's a lovely, lovely book.
Thank you. It's a huge honor coming from you.
Thank you so much for allowing me to ask you questions, my little rapid fire questions at the end.
The rapid fire ones were terrifying, but they were good, except for the housekeeping one. Oh, well. But then I'm housekeeping my books, of course.
There it is.
Of course, that's what it is.
I think we're going to turn it. You don't think it's a gift?
No, I do think that people have gifts in different areas, and that gift of being able to make a house beautiful is a gift. I don't think it's something that you like learn out of a book. I think you just it's an expression of your personhood, and I don't have that expression, but I have other expressions.
No, you're quite right, and there's art in it as well. It is a kind of art, making a house beautiful without any guidance from someone else.
Yeah, and there's no way to learn that. You just have to work it out for yourself. Do we have
questions? So let's bring Peter in, and he can take it from here.
Hi there. I feel like such an evil person pulling you out of this conversation, because I'm having so much fun listening to the two of you. But that is my role here. So a couple of questions here. I think we were all too absorbed in this conversation. Corey says, you're a big fan of libraries. Have your research habits changed with the advent of the internet?
Oh, yes. I am a huge fan of libraries, and in fact, cut my teeth in libraries when I was very young. And I used to have a fantasy when I was a kid in Yarmouth I would plot to get myself locked in the library on Saturday evening, and then I'd have Sunday and maybe a holiday Monday in the library by myself to just read whatever I wanted. But the wonderful thing about the internet is that you can do it sitting still, and so you can do it faster. And with the vaudeville book, I really learned the appalling universality of strangeness, that whatever you can dream up, whatever you're wondering about, some person has devoted their life to putting it all online. And you can, if you're an inventive searcher, you can find anything now in the internet. And it's just so useful to have that the galaxy of information right at our fingertips. And one of the things that I fear about, COVID, about everything, is that we'll somehow allow that to deteriorate, and we'll lose this portal to everything. In some way, we'll somehow let it fracture and lose it, or by government surveillance or something. There was a news article yesterday that Google has decided that it will give search histories to the police.
Writers across the world were going, "Oh my God!"
In fact, it's the plot of Strong Poison by Dorothy L. Sayers, where a murder mystery writer is accused of murder because she was researching poisons for her book.
Yeah, not good.
I have another question here. This saying, the seafaring sections are so vivid. How does a prairie person write so evocatively about the sea?
It's so funny. I'm so glad that you call me a prairie person, but in my own mind, I'm entirely an ocean person, because I moved to Nova Scotia when I was 7, and I just sort of took on that identity as, this is my real place, this is my real home. And so really the question should be, how can a person who considers herself to be an ocean person get so many things wrong or not know enough? The thing is that the sea lore is just such a vast topic. I did things like I joined the Merchant Navy Brotherhood in the United Kingdom in order to go into their archives, and so I still get regular birthday greetings from the merchant seamen of the United States now. And even so, after spending 12 years researching various maritime things, I know so little of what there is to be known, and I'm so embarrassed about it. But luckily, I had Kay and Thea as my excuse, because they didn't know either what was happening. They could watch the crew running around taking sail up and bringing sail down, and their ignorance saved me from a lot of embarrassment. But I really enjoyed the research.
Yeah, I think that's right. What you just said is that we can often use our characters as a kind of buffer or filter for what we don't know. But I have to say, yes, you did your research, but you wrote about the sea in that book as if you had spent your life sailing the seven seas. Honestly, like, I've never read another book that really made me feel, when I was reading it, as if I was at sea. Joseph Conrad, no. Like, this is the book.
Maybe Joseph Conrad. I thought about that actually, because I love Conrad and I read all of him thinking about this. And you're right, he doesn't really put a whole lot in. And I think it's because he knew it so well that he didn't have to. So he could leave out details because he just knew them. Whereas I had to look them up and had to figure them out. But I also really love it. I love it. And so it was a pleasure. One of the pleasures of the book was being at sea.
That's wonderful. Now, the final question here is, you spoke about characters that just appeared and walked into the book. Now, which characters took a turn and went, wow, I didn't think you were going to go in that direction?
I don't think I've ever had a character flounce off and say, I'm not going to be in this book.
But at least say, I'm going to be someone else than you imagined.
Yeah, I'd rather be in Jackie Baker's book, actually. Thank you very much. I have had a story just not work, a novel just not work. And that's a very sad thing. And it never feels, the guilt never goes away that you didn't manage to solve it and fix it and find the way that the book could become itself. And I'm still guilty about one book set in Fernie, BC in the 60s, called The Beard Contest, that I really probably will someday turn into a short story. I'm not good at letting things go. I don't know about you, Jackie, but do you go back to old things and
I can carry a book and a grudge for a long time.
Yep.
Endlessly, really.
I'm not so good with grudges because I'm very forgetful. And I just sort of kind of forget what we were fighting about. But that saved my marriage many a time.
Well,
Oh,
I hate to bring this to a close, but I have to. It's been an absolute delight being in this conversation. Thank you both. Jackie, you're such a generous interviewer. Yet once more, it's always a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for coming tonight. And
thank you, Peter.
Marina, yeah, Marina, you're among friends here, and thank you for visiting us again. It's a delight, thorough
I'm
pleasure to
really
have you.
sorry that it's not really in person because your St. Albert audience is one of the best in the country, and I always really
Oh,
my visits there. But we'll come back. Jackie and I'll just come when we
yeah,
can.
Please
let's
do.
do it.
Please do. Always welcome. Well, as we close out the evening's events, thank you both again to our guests tonight. I do want to remind you, you can buy both authors' books at the Edmonton's independent bookstores, Audrey's Books and Glass Bookshops. The links are posted online. Please go ahead, buy them. And then finally, as we go, thank you to our crew here in the background doing the tech work. Without them, this show really cannot happen. So thank you so much for that part. Do also take a moment to stop at the end of our show, look at our list of sponsors. Thank you to them as well. And visit Starfest online at www.starfest.ca. Look at the other fabulous authors we have coming up in the next few days. Register for events. We'd love to have you back. So from me, until next time, good night.